All right, let me see. I think I see everybody. I'm still figuring out my screen views. But we're still, so Margaret, Jonathan, Don's here. Liz has not rejoined. I can see.
Kathleen too, right?
Not back yet.
There we go.
And
Okay.
we're looking for Kathleen as well.
Yep, Kathleen. Yep.
Liz is coming in now, just waiting on Kathleen.
Perfect. Thank you. Hi again, Liz. Yeah, Liz, we're just waiting a couple more minutes for Kathleen. Margaret or Jonathan, is there an obligatory amount of time that we wait, or?
I think we're actually
No.
technically supposed to start once we have a quorum of the committee.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Which I believe we do. So why don't we go ahead and get started? All right. So the first item on our agenda is establishing sort of our committee priorities for this year. You know, I think it makes sense that we focus on, you know, let's say 2, maybe 3 accomplishments that we feel that we can get done in this year. You know, something, you know, again, to use our SMART goals, something that's measurable, you know, something that we can actually attain, and then something that we can track. Does anybody have any thoughts or input on that? Is there anything that you know, that we've discussed as a board over the last at least year since I've been on it, but anything, you know, that Margaret or Jonathan from a historical perspective?
Can I just get clarity? When you say this year, are we talking through the end of the school year this year? Or are we talking like November to November? Just because I think that has an impact on what we can.
Yeah, I was thinking November to November, but I could be talked back to the end of the school year. I don't think that's the realistic timeline.
I thought strategic planning was 3 to 5 years out, not this school year. Maybe I misunderstand the intent of the committee.
So strategic planning is 3 to 5 years out. The committee assignments are November to November. So this committee should be looking at what should be the goals for a 3 to 5 year commitment, but also what does the committee want to actually accomplish in this current year. It can be moving
Right.
things forward to a certain stage, but something concrete.
Right. You know, could be having a 3 to 5 year plan for transportation, a 3 to 5 year plan for redistricting, a 3 to 5 year plan for any of those. So, right.
All 3 of those would be great.
Exactly. Right. Sure. Absolutely. And so there we go. That was easy. Next agenda item. We're good. So, but I think 3 would be, those 3 in particular would be a heavy lift. So so maybe we focus on two of those and get those, that's something that we can get to a measurable place, okay, an actionable, some actionable steps, and then we can tackle a third, given time permitting.
I just want to say, in terms of redistricting.
Oh, hey, Kathleen.
I'm sorry, I'm here.
Sure.
Sooner rather than later, because if we could do it the least painfully, we start with the cohorts coming in as soon as possible. So if we just redistrict a little bit in the north schools to the southern schools to redistrict those high schools, I think it would be the least, I hate to use the word painful, but
Right.
the least impact. I hate to use impact as a verb, but have the least impact.
Right. And then I think that makes sense too, because I think there's a strong transportation component with that also.
And can I just get clarity on this? So the redistricting, though, it's not a redistricting to try to save money. It's a redistricting to handle, which I think is also later on the agenda, the issue with the middle schools, right? So we have clarity of why redistricting. Okay.
That's my understanding. If anyone else has a different understanding.
I think we also know that over the past few years, we have hundreds less students. So looking at feeder patterns and making sure that we've got appropriate facilities forecasting is probably, I know that Dr. De Silva and the team do that every year, but given the volume of decrease of students, this is something that we should think about. Guys, we have old buildings. We are going to have to think about facilities at some point as well. We've got HVAC systems that are failing. We've got a town that has, aging buildings. We've got to look at this at some point. And if it comes along with redistricting or not, if we do not maintain the insides of our buildings up to par or renovate them appropriately, we're going to be in real trouble. At some point they start to crumble, right? So, and with a lot less students, maybe it comes along with redistricting that we start to look at building and facility usage a little bit differently.
Yeah, agreed.
I agree
it
with
doesn't.
this. I think you're right.
Yeah, it doesn't do a lot of good to redistrict, children into a school that's not, that the facilities aren't up to the level that they need to be.
Or not needed anymore.
Exactly.
You have to be realistic. If the population is contracting, we need all the data. Obviously, this group needs to think about that data in a fact-based way. But the fact that our district is declining, the population of Connecticut is declining, our funding is declining. These are all things that should warrant some hard looks, and these are hard decisions, and they're much past any of our tenure on this committee for sure. But I think at some point the Board of Ed has an accountability to do this.
We do also have to, if I may, just keep in mind that the declining enrollment that we are projecting is all at the high school, and we can't close one high school and be left with zero, with the elementary schools projected to be at the bottom of their trough and increasing from here. And not to minimize the fact that the buildings are old and small, but closing a building might not necessarily be the answer that this committee.
Yeah, but you could also shift around grades. You could do all kinds of things, and I don't think we're trying to solve for it today. There's lots of districts that have different grade structures into feeder.
Absolutely.
Schools. So I do think that should be a priority. That's what we're talking about now, not the solution for the redistricting, but the priorities of this committee. And so I'll just stop there. Yeah.
No, I think Liz, I think that dovetails nicely with the redistricting conversation. So I think that it could definitely be a part of that, as we move forward with that discussion. But on a transportation, and then discussing, redistricting specifically related to the feeder pattern, But then as part of that, I think Liz is correct, and Kathleen, that we need to consider the facilities as we move forward with that discussion. Anybody have any questions or objections to that? Okay, so let's move now down into our next discussion item, which is transportation. So we get comfortable on that. So we need to sort of get a handle on our transportation. So what our transportation needs are going to be moving forward. I know we have the bus contract is coming up. So that's one of the reasons that's driving this as a priority, other than the fact that it has been a relatively hot topic over the last definitely at least year that I've been on the board, but I think for significantly longer than that. So
Ken, do you want us to follow up from where we were?
Yes.
From our last board meeting, we did meet with the reps from Edulog.
Okay.
John really has 2 slides, a few bullets, but can we just at minimum give the committee a status update on from February 8th to now, what our communication has been with Edulog? Is that all right?
Absolutely. I think that would be very, very helpful.
If you don't mind sharing your screen.
I will share my screen. There it goes. Can everyone see
Yes.
my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, there we go. Okay. Just a few slides, just to kind of walk everyone through where we were back in February, March of 2020. Interim superintendent at the time, Dr. Patty Foote, asked Edulog to perform a system assessment and efficiency analysis on our transportation routing. The goal was to analyze a number of key efficiencies related to Richfield Public Schools bus routing and scheduling operation. The consultant agreement was agreed upon on March 10th, 2020. The services that were asked to be performed of our current data was operational assessment, which would focus on the routing process and use of routing software with the objective to better understand how the transportation department currently uses the Edulog software tools. A data assessment to assess the current data critical to operation optimization work with a focus on the routing and scheduling database, and analyze current routing, route feasibility, bell times, assignment loads, and negative slack, and also to do an efficiency study to assess the efficiency of the current routing scheme and make recommendations to improve overall transportation operations efficiencies and service.
And if you don't mind just stopping there for a second. So when we went back to the contract or the agreement that Dr. Patty Foote and Edulog had that came to be, the critical word that I see in this agreement with the services to be performed is the word current. So for example, in the efficiency assessment, they were asked, and that's what their contract says, to assess the efficiency in the current routing scheme. In the data assessment, they were asked to assess the current data critical to the optimization. And then the first piece, which is the operational assessment, that was intended to be an on-site visit, of which they were not able to do because of COVID. And why that actually can't be done virtually is a conversation that we're currently having, and they're open to making the on-site visit now or finding a way to make this happen. So that's the one piece that's still left to be done. But that work is actually intended to be directly with somebody from Edulog, with Rick, to ensure that we're maximizing the Edulog software tool. And quite frankly, that we're actually using the most up-to-date Edulog tool. But I think one of the key factors that I noticed with this contract is that word current. So they weren't looking to gather new data, at least not in this agreement. Next slide, we'll talk about next steps and whether or not this board wants to go that road, down that route. But essentially, those two pieces that they were charged to do, I think they made efforts to do. Dawn, you want to?
So I guess my question on that though is, if we asked them to do an operational assessment, I didn't see the results of an operational assessment in that board deck. It was, the data's not there, we're going to make some stuff up because the data's not there. And during that conversation, it was admitted that we leave data in there that's not good. So they made a few strides toward a data assessment, but the operational and efficiency assessments, even for the current state, couldn't be done because of the data assessment. Now, you could argue it was a bad contract because that should have been a first deliverable before the other two were even considered, right? But I would argue that their operational assessment that they presented was based on literally fiction because they didn't have the data. And so I'm not sure why an efficiency assessment would even be beneficial if the first two steps aren't there either. So I know they said current, but if the current data isn't there, I don't know how you can do the rest of it, right? And as a software provider, as I deal with all day long in my day job, they know better. And the fact that they even had in here how the transportation department is currently using the software, that should have been the first thing they said is you're not really using the software because the data is all bad.
Yeah, so Liz, you're right with a couple of the pieces. And I think there's a little bit of a, and it's hard to get my head around what was actually asked of, what was the purpose, right? What was the problem? Because if you look here, what the goal is, and I think back to February 8th, those things don't line up. So what I was left with from the board on February 8th, and there were a lot of things thrown out. So there was something at one point thrown out around a GPS tracker, but that purpose was something different. And I don't know what was presented. And, to be fair, I haven't gone and recycled all of those board videos. So I don't know what their charge was or what the board really wanted them to do. I think I know now. And Ken and the committee will guide us on next steps. But when you look at what the goal is here on this slide and as part of the agreement, I'm not sure that those things lined up to now. That said, on the operational assessment piece, what you just described isn't necessarily, and we'll see that when we transition, isn't necessarily the way that they're defining the operational assessment. So the way in which they're defining the operational assessment is that EduLog, along with First Student, right? We're obligated to have EduLog as part of our contract with First Student. And in that process, they give us software. And so to ensure that our transportation office is using that software, whatever version of that software is, I'm not even sure if it's the most up to date, are we maximizing the tool that's available to us? They never did that part of the work. So that work is still left to be done and they're aware of that. But it's not the data that you were asking for on February 8th. And basically the way that they're defining that data is it would come out of the efficiency assessment. As a result of the efficiency assessment, you need to do A, B, and C. And we'll talk about that, Dawn, when you click to the next slide. And so this is really where we are right now. And we're truly just giving you a status from our understanding with the group. And I was on the call. Rick was on the call, Dawn was on the call, and actually Karen Dewing, who's here for a lot of different reasons tonight, mostly because of her historical knowledge of everything. But we wanted to be sure that we were understanding exactly what their charge was and where we are right now. And so as defined, Dawn, if it's okay with you, I'll just take this slide. So as defined by them, in order to do this efficiency study, and Liz, this goes back to what you were saying, is there some pieces that they needed to have. So they basically said, wait a minute, in order to be the most efficient, here are some things that you need to do, right? You need to remove empty stops. So Rick's taking care of that. Within 3 days, he took care of that. They said, well, you need to update your mapping to better assign stops to addresses. So there's Google Maps that gets updated, right, live, but that may not be good enough. There may be other software that we're going to need, or perhaps that's not good enough. And there's something, and that we may need to purchase that, by the way, or there's paper to pencil. And that's not something we would purchase from them, by the way, it's perhaps someone else, or we may have to go paper to pencil. So they had lots of different experiences that we may need to be a part of in order to answer that second part of it. And then the last question, which is determine ridership. And that one's a little bit complicated in this moment in time, however, not something that we can't do. And so without even their help, we can create a Google form, right, that we can send out to parents and say, okay, hypothetically speaking, next year, if this was not a COVID year, would you be accessing transportation? So we can simply determine ridership. May not save a penny, but it may be more efficient, right? Or may save an hour or two in the day or a week. But that's the information that they need. Now, Dawn, if you don't mind going back to that first slide right before that, when it comes down to this efficiency assessment and what they reported to us, assess efficiency in the current routing scheme. They're saying, no, you're not efficient until you do those three things. That's basically what they did. So whether we agree with the way in which they did it or not, that's essentially what happened. They assessed our current routing scheme and said, you can be more efficient if you get rid of the stops, get your ridership, and update your mapping software. We may have been able to do that ourselves, right? We may have been able to answer those questions ourselves or not, but that's ultimately what they said. All right, Dawn, it's back to you.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide, which is ultimately the last slide. Edulog when we had our meeting with them, they said that they will create a proposal of action steps to reach the board's recommended goals. The proposal will include cost and timeline of completion. And we believe that what we heard was that one of the goals, or the goal was can we reduce the cost of busing while ensuring that our students arrive to school safely and on time? But we leave this open to this committee to give us a little bit of direction to go back to them and say, this is what the goal is. If that's one of the goals, if there's other goals, what would we like to see their data reach out for?
I guess I would ask, why are we asking Edulog to do this? So they're a software provider that is incented to sell us more software. They're not incented to optimize our use of that software unless we're planning on putting something in the contract that says, upon completion, you get a kicker for whatever percentage we're able to optimize and save cost on, right? Which is obviously more complex in a government situation. So I'd like to see an RFP go out to Edulog and other providers to actually say, if we're going to spend money on this, let's find the right provider that can do this, because I don't know that Edulog is the best. I don't know who else we looked at. Just because we had an incumbent provider there, that doesn't mean they're the best one.
Yeah, and so that you bring up a good question, Liz, and there is some history, and I do think that it's worth, and you're right, we can do an RFP, and Edulog may not be the best provider. Ultimately with Edulog, the cost that we would be associated with is if we need an upgrade on the software. That might happen when they're operationally here. That may have been true regardless. If there's a cost associated with the mapping service, I don't think that goes directly to them. That would go with whatever mapping service we would need and we would select. Then there's certainly the cost of the study, right, that they're doing. That's what you're really speaking to, because the other piece, we may need to update our Edulog software anyway. So they're going to still have to do that operational piece, and we ask them to do it, and we're paying them to do it. So we want that information. Or, that's neither here nor there. But I do believe, and I pulled as much as I could to try to go back to the history, and I'm not sure who on this board actually has the history, but there is some history with respect to studies, and I think they evolved around school start time, and that's where those studies came from, in 3 tiers and 4 tiers, and are we running most efficiently? I don't know that we were asking the same questions, or that the data that they're saying we should be providing is the data that we were providing. So I don't know that, and I'm not sure if anyone on the board knows the answer to that. I mean, I think probably Margaret, I hate to put you on the spot, might be the only one that has that history, and perhaps Rick.
Yeah, I'll be honest, a lot of the information that was provided didn't necessarily make it to the board at the time that those studies came back. So I don't have a lot of the information.
So I know that School Bus Consultants was another organization that they used. And at that time, the goal was to reduce a school bus, or to reduce buses. I believe at one time they said 4, from what I understand historically. I'm not sure how accurate I'm even being, so I'll just put that out here. I think that one time they said 4 and then it ended up with 1. And then the interim superintendent, Dr. Patty Foote, came and realized very quickly that they couldn't do it. And so there had to be a shift at that point. And I believe that's an accurate statement. Rick, correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
No, you're right.
So I know that we have some study somewhere, we just need to find it, from school bus consultants that was done to look to see if we could reduce. And that was, I think, done when Karen Baldwin was here, and then it transitioned to interim superintendent Rob Miller, Dr. Miller, and then came Dr. Patty Foote. I think Dr. Patty Foote version one, Dr. Patty Foote, and then obviously there was version 2, and then Dr. Collins, and then myself. So we can pull those reports because I think it's important to have that information to see what was already done, so we're not paying to have a redo.
Now,
We're going after it the same way, right? I think the other thing here is those things didn't reach conclusion for a reason, not just because of the school start time, and the obviously churn at the leadership level has a big impact there. But I think we also need to look back and say, what approach did we take with these consultants? How did we pick them? Were they the right partner? Were they really data driven, or were they just selling their services all over to districts? Were they doing things, and that's why I think we just need to make sure that as we write these things, we're, to your point, and what you're trying to do here is perfect, ask the right questions, but also be very detailed about our expectations of their skill set before we engage with them. And I think that's something I don't remember. I don't think I was on the board when school bus consultants was chosen, but I don't know where they came from or why we picked them or what the rationale was for that or anything. So I think, making sure we have the right partner for this that's incented the right way is a good thing. So
I agree with you there. And wherever this committee ends up going, I think when we establish, to Ken's point earlier, we establish some SMART goals, and then we can have folks come and present, right? This is what we can offer. This is the cost. And then we can make a decision if that's the direction in which, but I think clarity and purpose, at least for us, is really important. So Rick, you were going to say something.
Excuse me. School bus consultants came in to do an efficiency study based on changing school bus time, school bell times.
Thanks, Rick.
And I think we mentioned it before, there's some contractual obligation to using the Edulog software with First Student. Was that?
Yeah, so if on page 23 of our contract with First Student, it says the contractor shall provide a GPS system that so I don't know if it's us or them, it's really them, but our contract does include Edulog that integrates with the required Edulog routing software and then provides the board with GPS data, et cetera. So they're the contractor, but it does indicate that the software is through Edulog. So we'd have to find out if that's an option to swap, if that's the direction that.
Well, you can use their software and not their services, right?
Yeah.
So their software is just a tool to get data and all of that. And I think, if we really look at technology use in the world today, collecting data and using data are two very different things often. And so maybe Edulog's the right thing from a route optimization and day-to-day management perspective if we use it the right way, which we still don't really know if we are because we have to fill out those other things. Yeah. But we still want to look at the data, and maybe I don't know anything about school bus consultants or their data expertise or scientific ability, but I do think we should think about, one, do we have the data, right? That's the first thing, and that's what you guys are working on. But the second thing is, who do we want to go look at the data that's going to produce the outcomes that we're looking for, which is a cost optimization exercise, as well as obviously the goal to get students to school safely and on time. But I think we may have an opportunity here to use both, right? But just because we have to use Edulog software, I want to be really clear. Normally, just because you have to use their software doesn't mean the data is not ours. And I don't know what that contract says, but that data should be ours.
So Liz, you're accurate. What we're expected to use is the software. How we move forward with looking at somebody, an organization to look at our data, no different than school bus consultants, right? I believe that we have the liberty to do that without a problem. The only piece I just want to make sure we don't get mixed up on, the operational assessment that has not been completed, that's still part of this contract, and it focuses on the routing processes and them doing an on-site visit with Rick, for lack of a better word, the transportation department, which is one person. So that work still needs to be done. The other piece of data that you're speaking about, which is on the next slide, Dawn, the removing empty stops, that's been done. They already gave us our recommendations. The determined ridership we can do on our own, right? The using the mapping is where we'll need help from some organization, more than likely. So that piece is there.
So since they actually weren't able to do the operational piece of the contract, are there any savings from that?
That would be a Dawn question, but the contract itself was essentially $4,000 for each of those parts. Whether or not they've been fully paid yet or not, I'm not sure how that gets invoiced. I'll leave that to Dawn. But the operational assessment would have been $4,000, the data assessment $4,000, the efficiency $4,000. That's the way the contract reads.
I personally would still like them to come out and to make sure that we have their most updated software and make sure we're using it to the best that we can. That if there's, I know softwares evolve over time. We've had Edgelog, Rick, I don't know how many years they've been with us. We've had it for quite some time. Is there changes to their software that we're not aware of that we could use to make our lives a little easier, to make things processed a little better? So it's like a learning for their software. I think we still, in my opinion, I think that's still an important part to do with them, to have them come out to look at the software we have with them, and how Rick's using it, and to give any guidance or support to better utilize what their product is.
And ultimately,
can I just ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Why do they need to be on site to look at our software?
Exactly my question.
Not necessarily, well,
Isn't that a phone call?
Yeah, they were the ones who recommended coming out and sitting side by side with Rick and saying, okay, let's create some routes. Let's go here. How are you doing it here? Are you doing it there? May not necessarily be that.
Honest. I literally run IT for a major corporation, and there is very few instances where you can't share a screen. We're doing it right now.
Right.
So
No, I understand.
They couldn't do this until now is a little disconcerting from a service management perspective.
Edgelog knows what version I'm on of their software.
Exactly. I would think they would.
The reality is they're intending to do that piece, and we have a contract with them, right?
But it's 4,000 plus their travel expenses, right?
So the contract does, pardon me?
If they come out, we do. Yeah.
Yes, it does. It does indicate that we'd be paying for their travel expenses. But I agree with you, Liz, and we did broach that topic. So I think they're open to that. But we did.
I mean, that might help create a more efficient, even if they do end up coming out, that they've answered some of their key questions remotely, right? You can literally share, Rick, you can share your screen, you can show them stuff. There are ways to do that in a remote setting that might accelerate any on-site visit that they would do as well.
Yep.
Were there any time constraints on this contract? I mean, if we signed it a year ago, did they have, you can do this when you feel like doing it, or was there within 12 months you're going to do X, Y, and Z?
There were no time constraints on it that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I think when we originally, or I didn't have the conversation with them on the initial creation of the contract, but my thought would be that back then we didn't do a lot of remote learning, a lot of remote, well, we didn't, not in the school system. And then now that that's more common practice for us, I can see that that's definitely an avenue that we should utilize. Agree, totally agree.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good rule of thumb. Anything, technology related can be done technologically. So, the software, as Liz pointed out, they could remote in, they could share your screen, they could control your screen, they can show you the right, buttons to click and where to put the data and what data you need.
Yeah.
All of that can be done remotely.
Yep, we agree.
All right. So where do we go from here? So where were you discussing dates or times with regarding any additional assessments they're going to do, Dr. De Silva?
So we asked them to provide in writing clarity on what the scope of this work would actually look like with lots of detail and a timeline. And so we're waiting for that piece. We didn't move forward with any other until we just have that frame of reference. So I think what I might find to be helpful, just from my perspective on an operational side, is, and I'm not sure that this question can be answered today, and maybe it can't, or maybe it can, is, are there short-term goals? Because there was a lot thrown out, right, with the 3 to 5 years. Are there short-term goals and then long-term goals? This may just be a short-term goal, right, that we want to wrap this up. And if that's the case, and then I would ask, what are those short-term questions that we want answered, and some real clarity on that. And then what are the outcomes that you're looking for, so that we can be really clear. And then if the next part of that, in order to solve for that, is, well, we don't want to just hear from one. We don't want just a scope of work from one organization. We'd like to see it from 3 or 4. In fact, we'd like to, given the nature of this, we'd like to have them come to committee and share out, or to the board, or however way you see fit, and to share out what the work or the scope of their work is. Glad to do that as well. So, we can certainly do the research on our end with our colleagues that in this area that have done the work with Edulog and other companies, and see, maybe they're not in this area, but they're outside of this area. And if they've been pleased with the work, and go from there, we're glad to do that. Obviously that takes a little bit of time, so we'd ask for some patience on that, but it looks to me like we have a pretty busy committee structure. So
yeah, so this is 6% of our budget overall, right? So transportation is a huge, huge line item. And to dismiss that this is an important piece of the budget growth would be foolish for this committee to do. So my opinion, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is we do need to finish this operational assessment as quickly as possible to see if we're actually using the investments that we are investing in. If we're not using software that we're buying, whether we're compelled to buy it or not, we need to fix our processes and either use it or change our process so that we are not saying we're using it and we're using pen and paper or whatever archaic method we're doing. So that we need to, I agree, we need to finish that. I don't believe that requires in-person visitation right away. So I would ask that this group goes back and says, when can you get time with this group to see if we're leveraging their software the correct way? It's unfortunate that they're charging us for that. That's really crazy, but neither here nor there. We signed the contract. From there, I'd like to say, personally, I'd like to say we have good data now because we've done this data assessment. Let's go back an RFP out for a firm that can help us use our data and use modern technology concepts to do route optimization, and put part of the incentive in there that if you find cost savings that are viable, that there's an incentive for the companies to do that, because then you might get bids that are a little different than, Joe District down the street used XYZ contract, because all of that should feed into our contract negotiations with First Student or the other busing companies, which are coming up for renewal. And if we don't have all of this information before that, we're just going to go through the same process we've gone through for the last 20 years, which is our transportation costs continue to go up and up and up and up. We have to go find and scramble for special ed transportation. We've got no good data, and we just keep asking the taxpayers to pay more and more for less and less students. And our geography hasn't changed. So that would be my thought on course of action is short term, do this operational assessment, slightly midterm is we start really looking for a partner that can use data and technology to help us do this more efficiently. And I think there's also a piece here around perhaps some lobbying around some of the regulatory environments that are out there for busing. We have an obligation in Connecticut to have a seat for every student. And I think that there's a lot of different interpretations of that. I know in some other districts, they do have opt-out. And I do think we need to get some clarity on what flexibility we have for ridership options and what would that look like. And if you have modern technology, how complex that gets to change routes and things. But I think these are things we need to modernize to kind of digitize what we're doing here and think about, 6% of our budget is a lot. We save 10% on that. That's a teacher and more, right? And I think we really need to look at that.
Agree. Those are really good points, Liz.
I'm going to add something else as being a member of the Energy Task Force. They've been talking about, and they're speaking with the town as we go into negotiations with whatever bus company we do. They're all looking at, and the state of Connecticut is, in terms of reducing fuel consumption. And they're looking at, and there are programs, if you work with your bus companies, to be able to get them to begin to invest in electric buses. And I just want to put that out there. That's not short term, but it's long term in terms of looking at what's right for the health of our children and their lives going forward, and also for the state of Connecticut and and they're looking at it everywhere. So I just know that's going to be on the table. I just wanted to put it there. Not short term, but I think it's an important piece in negotiation, because I think Madison already has negotiated getting an electric bus.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ken, can I say something?
Oh yeah, please. I can't see hands with the screen.
So I agree with a lot of what Liz outlined as some next steps, but where I might want to interject perhaps a different mode of thought is, so I understand transportation is a large part of our budget, but what I might say with the outcome isn't necessarily that saving money on bus routes. I would actually want at some point to have the discussion around, maybe it's not about saving money on a bus, maybe it's instead focusing on getting our elementary schools back to the same tier. So, and we know that to do that will probably require more buses. So if through optimization, we're able to save buses, redeploy those buses instead to then get our elementary students on the same tier. So I just wanted to be able to put that out there as something to also keep in the back of our minds.
I agree, Margaret. I mentioned that at the board meeting, but thank you.
On that, so Dr. De Silva, so what Edulog is coming back with, because I think you said they wanted to give us additional pricing. Is that that's not to complete the work that they've already been contracted for? That would be for the move forward that we're now discussing doing an RFP for?
How did I do that to myself? So my husband's dream. So that first bullet around coming digitally or virtually to work with Rick on Edulog software, that's part of this contract. So there's no additional cost for that. What appears to be the costs that would be associated with next steps is that middle bullet, which is around the mapping and understanding the roads, which are complex, obviously, in Ridgefield. And there are some roads that just can't be found on the Google Maps, for example. And so therefore, sometimes like when you put in your GPS, right? You put 70 Prospect Street and you end up in the woods. And that's because it's not available by the way of GPS. And so therefore helping us identify what roads, right, or what crossroads, and I can't remember their language specifically, but what crossroads aren't available through Google Maps, and are there other software out there that they can help find so that we can access that? And if not, then are we then doing, and paper to pencil is probably not the right word, but that's kind of the way I envisioned it. That is what's going to come with a cost. Then what would also come with a cost is once we give them the data that they're missing, right? Because they looked at our current routes. So once they get the data that they're missing, which is what the legwork is on our part, they have a software tool that they can do, that they can use, meaning that they could send something out to all of our families and say, okay, here's the, here, do you want to opt in or opt out, whatever way it is. And that would feed itself right into the routes, but they actually were willing to take something, and that comes with a cost, but they were willing to basically give us the data that they need, and then we could do it ourselves, and they could just feed it in. So that would be, no cost for the actual collection of the data, but the work is on our part. So that then they would be doing what I think you're asking them to do, is answer that question, but they need those data points, and they need that mapping piece. So, and Ken, I'll see when I actually see the scope of their work and the timeline, and they're eager to do this right for us. There's no doubt, but at the same time, we just have to have it really clearly articulated, and just being sure that what we see as an outline, regardless of the price for a minute, just put that as a side, is actually what we're looking to the question that we're looking to answer, questions. So we'll move forward with the first bullet and their work with Rick. That part is easy. We'll start planning for a possible survey for families. We won't send that out right now because we don't need to. So we'll send that out when it's appropriate to do so, when we identify what the next level of work is, if we're going to send out an RFP, or if the cost is appropriate, that it's not necessary. That's another, I just don't know. And so we wanted to give you at least a summary of what happened since the last time we met, because clearly that was a lot of questions came out as a result of that. But I don't want you to think that we have all the answers yet.
Yeah, I would just want to, just one thing you said, Susie, that even if it doesn't require an RFP because of the cost, I think we need to look at the potential value as well. So just because EduLog is only charging us a couple thousand, but we're not getting anything out of it, versus maybe thinking about it differently. So I just want to, because that would be my ask, is just, this is a valuable part of our budget. And I think it's one that could potentially, to Margaret's point, help us optimize with some of the desires of the community from a start time perspective, from schools. There's a lot of potential benefit here if we do this in a way that finds us some nuggets. So
Liz, to your point, and if this committee, we'll get their information, and if this committee is interested in hearing from other groups, we're glad to get that research done and have, if nothing else, a presentation so that we can make a decision in terms of moving forward.
Okay, so I think where we're landing on this topic is that you're going to hear back from EduLog, and then we'll be able to know how we're moving forward once we get that data information.
So we'll hear back from EduLog. Hopefully that happens before our next meeting, and we'll do a little bit of research in terms of what other communities that are similar to ours have with companies that they've worked with. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more information to share by the time we meet next. And then we'll go from there.
Okay.
Just for a point of clarity at this moment in time, though, the slide where Dawn had the question that we were looking to answer was a draft question. We're looking to see whether or not we can cost save, right? And get our kids to school safe and on. I guess the next question I've had, though, I think this comes back to the broader discussion that we likely need to outline in terms of our charge, right? You need to outline for our charge. Are there underlying questions that we're looking to answer also? And if so, I think that that's an important piece to know before we prepare any RFP, right? So if we're looking to answer, for example, Margaret's question, regardless of cost, can you tell us, where there might be efficiencies, but yet how we can get our elementary students to school on time? So in combination with this, can we do this? All those underlying questions, I think it's important that we know them. And maybe between now and our next meeting, we could evaluate what questions we want answered, but I think it's important for us to be really clear.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. And I think to get regardless of what the questions are, we need that good data. And we need to be able to acquire it.
And I think we need to know, although I know, we all know, more buses will cost more, but the ratio of time to buses and the use of buses, how that may play into the mathematical equation of what it costs. And I can't do that, but I know there are people who can.
I would
Because
just,
I agree that the community keeps asking for those elementary start times, particularly, and
I think the other piece, regardless of whether you, and again, I certainly have a desire to get the elementary on the same tier, but I think even regardless of that, something we heard about in the presentation was that slack time and the negative slack time. And I think something we've heard in multiple presentations is the fact that the 4-tier system, and I know I lived this, my kids were actually, I would call it 4B, right? So, you know, at Barlow, half of the kids got picked up at a certain time and the others got picked up 15 minutes later. So it was almost like 5 tiers of busing. And I think we're still experiencing that. So the second part of that draft goal that you had, which is getting our kids to and from school in a timely manner, to me is actually almost more important than any other element, because if they're not at school on time, then they're missing some learning. And then at night, if they're not getting home till late, because these are our little guys, they're just too tired to be doing anything at home. So I feel like that is actually a very big priority for us. And I think that's a function of that, again, that slack time. We just, although it's an efficient routing system, we just don't have enough time between routes. I don't know how to solve that. Someone else can figure that out.
Someone earlier also mentioned redistricting. If you're serious about redistricting, and we probably should be serious about redistricting, that should be done before any type of optimization study. Otherwise, you're going to be doing that a second time after the redistricting. Just to throw that out there.
That's a really good point, Rick.
Need the data either way.
So yeah, definitely our first goal needs to be getting that data and making sure that it's good and usable. Absolutely.
And clarifying the goals for the team here.
Yes. Can we move in with Rick's segue into sort of the feeder patterns and what some opportunities for correcting or for aiding that might be?
So my question for the committee is, I don't know how much historical knowledge everyone has, and if that's where we wanted to start. That's actually one of the reasons I have Karen here, besides many other reasons, but her ability to recall a little bit of the history, that I think the most pertinent history, might be important to start. And Ken, I don't know if that's where you want to go, you tell me, but I think it was helpful to me to understand how we ended up here.
Yeah, absolutely. I would. I mean, I think we all have different levels of understanding of that, and so that it would help if we all had Karen's.
All right, so Karen, I don't know how far back you want to go, but in 6 minutes.
Okay, quick, but 20 years. So it goes back to 2001. As a caveat, I want to say I became an administrator in 2004. So after 2004, I had direct knowledge, but 2001, I had indirect knowledge. So in 2001, we had 5 elementary schools because Barlow was not open, and we had 1 middle school, Eastridge. So before we start about feeder patterns, just to talk about the concept of the home school. So for the elementary level, if you visualize the map of Ridgefield and you put a circle, for argument's sake, around each elementary school, there were 5 circles around Ridgefield. So if your house was in one of those circles, that home school was where your child went to elementary school. All children went to Eastridge. There was increased enrollment, and so the board in the town at that time had decided to build a new middle school and ultimately open a new elementary school. So in 2002, Scotts Ridge Middle School, excuse me, was open. So now, if you visualize your map of Ridgefield, they had to draw 2 circles, one for East Ridge and one for Scotts Ridge. I do not have knowledge of how they made that and what their rationale was for that, but there were obviously 2 districts. If your house lived in one of those districts, you went to East Ridge or you went to Scotts Ridge. The immediate following year in 2003, Barlow Mountain opened up. So now instead of having 5 circles for elementary, they needed to create 6. So that did cause redistricting across the district at the elementary level. And because they were going through that change, and they had just created the middle school boundaries, they chose not to move the middle school boundaries when they changed the elementary. So I know the outcome of that was that at Scotland, about 50% of the kids went to East Ridge when they graduated. About 50% of the kids went to Scotts Ridge when they graduated. And at Barlow, a handful of kids went to East Ridge and most went to Scotts Ridge. So there was a split. But the middle schools had been designed to be 60% East Ridge and 40% Scotts Ridge. So that did work for a while. Now, again, remember, we were at increased enrollment. So at some point, though, even when they opened, Scotts Ridge was already pretty much at the max. They were at full capacity from when they opened. And I know that around 2010, Superintendent Deborah Lowe did a mini redistricting where she took a couple streets near Ballard Park that was right near East Ridge that was slated to go to Scotts Ridge from Scotland and had them go to East Ridge to help alleviate some of that overcrowding at Scotts Ridge. The declining enrollment that ultimately then started to happen at the elementary was forecasted to hit at the middle school. So in 2000, and I believe it's 2017, again, I can get my years correct, but Dr. Baldwin decided to say, well, with declining enrollment at the elementary, if I can get less kids at East Ridge, we can ultimately save a team and reduce cost. And so she then decided to do a full 3 schools to East Ridge, Branchville, Farmingville, and VP, 3 full schools, Scotland, Barlow, and Ridgebury to Scotland, or Scotts Ridge. And then that would ultimately funnel more kids to Scotts Ridge, and we could reduce a team at East Ridge. That happened for 3 consecutive years. We've lost 3 teams over there. But as you can see from the demographer, that now has caused some increased enrollment, or actually more enrollment at Scotts Ridge versus East Ridge as a consequence of that. Because it originally was never designed to be 3 schools to one and 3 schools to the other. When we were looking at, we did have Mike Zuba, who does our enrollment projections every year, our demographer, at a school capacity study. We've looked at different variations, and it's been very hard to do a whole school. 4 schools to East Ridge and 2 to Scotts Ridge didn't work either. It did more at East Ridge and less at Scotts Ridge, and 3 and 3 never worked. But we're at the place right now where in policy, we're at 3 and 3. But that's kind of how we got from 2001 to 2021.
Thank you so much, Karen. You did a great job.
I will add one thing, just having been a part of the board at the time that decision was made for this split feeder, it was a response to declining enrollment for sure, was one of the reasons. But the other was because there was the feeling, again, at Barlow and at Scotland, where the classes were broken up and some of the kids going to East Ridge and some of them going to Scotts Ridge, that there was a desire for those classes to be able to stay with their classmates as they went into the middle school experience. So I wanted to add that to what Karen had. It's amazing, your recollection. So
no, but that is true. I mean, there were some parents that were concerned, some parents that weren't concerned. Yes.
Karen,
And
I'm
I
super
was
impressed.
thinking-
That's awesome. Oh, sorry, Kathleen. Go ahead.
As
Kathleen, you blocked out there. Mm-mm.
I'm sure, and if we can do it early enough that they're kindergarten through fifth, and then it feeds well. So that, I'm just, and that's, I'm not a demographer, but so that we can still keep the schools 3 to 3. And there are bigger elementary schools rather than others, and I do not know capacity. So there's so many questions.
I agree with that. I think you were saying, Kathleen, sorry, I missed the first part of that, but it is difficult when Scotts Ridge, which is the smaller of the 2 middle schools, has 3 of the 4 largest elementary schools feeding into it. So I think what I heard you say, Kathleen, is the redistricting isn't necessarily redistricting, kind of like Deb Lowe did a few years ago, where she took a pocket at the middle schools. The redistricting is probably needs to be done actually at the elementary level, so that you can then keep, the 3 schools whole in terms of where they feed into the middle schools, which is why I brought up that point. Is that what you're
That
saying?
would be my ideal vision, but I don't know the realities of that, but that would be a hope.
Yeah,
Well, I would just have one question. I don't know if it's ever been done, and Karen, maybe you are amazing with your memory. Did you guys ever look at grade changes in terms of keeping 6th grade in the elementary or moving 8th up or any of that?
Absolutely. There's a very comprehensive study, which I'm sure we can get to. It happened over several months with board members, stakeholders, community members, administration, where we looked at various configurations. So we looked at, because the ultimate goal was to close the school at that time because of the projected declining enrollment. So we looked at, could we have 3 schools that were K2, 3 schools, well, that isn't closing, but 3-5. Could we look at K4 and a 5-6? Could like Scotts Ridge be a 5-6? And, East Ridge be a 7-8 or 7-8-9? Like we looked at many variations of those at the time. And we updated it on all the scenarios, like over a 5-year trend based upon our enrollment projections. But that was done a while ago, but yes, many scenarios were examined.
Okay.
And ultimately, we couldn't fit by closing a school, and any other variation that we proposed was not supported.
Thank you.
Not supported educationally or not supported?
By the community.
Okay.
But yeah, there's definitely a big binder of those scenarios that we can show to look at what models we at least looked at.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay, so that gets us up through 2021. How do we move into 2022? I think is what we need to be looking at now. And then to Rick's point, I think this is it's gonna make a lot. It's going to impact. Excuse me. It's going to impact the transportation, and there may be some. There's definitely, as Liz pointed out earlier, there's going to be some influence into this discussion by the facilities, and what are they capable of sustaining, sort of in the medium to long term.
Well, I think one of the first things is you just hit on it, is I don't know if other schools can take more students in the elementary schools. What are their capacity? I mean, I'm sure it's there and I could look at it. But
That capacity study was done, I believe, Joe. I think that may have been something that you had shared very early on with me. And I believe at this point, the capacity study did not have, and I can tell you practically speaking, that being able to navigate additional classrooms, I think would be a challenge in some of our schools. One of the interesting things that you brought up, Kathleen, that I think is worth considering is, because it wasn't done that way, is looking at enrollment projections for our smaller schools and how they evolve over the next years, and determine if that albeit perhaps not going to make people very happy, but that shift is a possibility.
Well, I think the other factor that we should consider here is the town, right? I mean, we all know some of the rumors that go around desires for certain properties and things like that. And maybe there's an opportunity here to partner with the town to really consider a long-term strategy here that, you know, if the capacity of our current buildings isn't what we need it to be, and we know that our buildings are old, maybe there's an opportunity here. And obviously that's not a 5-year thing, and that would have to go to the voters, and this is not the year to do that, obviously. But, you know, when you look at building grants and things like that, you know, and the call for more multifamily housing and more density and all of these things start to drive a different conversation with the town itself around what do we have in terms of facilities. Maybe there's a rip and replace or expand type situation that we need to think about. To give up something, we have to get something, right? And I just wonder if it's not time. And I don't know. You guys were here whenever the Big Ben or whatever it was called, the big book, whatever that big time where they built Scotts Ridge, whatever that's called.
The bundle.
The bundle.
Thank you. I knew it was a B.
Almost done paying it off, right? The bundle's
Yeah, we're done paying
Yeah.
it off. So maybe it's time to rebundle, or to really consider that as part of, you know, the long-term strategy to make sure that the students of Ridgefield really have the facilities environmentally and educationally that we need. And I know, you know, there are nearby towns that are building 2 or 3 schools at a time. And not that we need to do that, but I do think we should look and say, if 5 years down the road, it's time for that, I'd rather start to have that conversation with the community now, because I think we could get some really good insight from people here. And you know, I look at it and say, boy, the East Ridge could be a flagship type situation, and it is. No disrespect to East Ridge, but you know, I mean, there's some opportunities there, and maybe this starts to spawn some different conversations there.
So we're running a little over time now. So we want to be respectful of everyone's time here. So let's see. So for next, is this the capacity study? Is that something that we would be able to get to members of the board?
I think we can do that.
Or the committee, I mean, sorry.
Yep, we'll find that. So I think that would be a good starting point. Does the board have an opportunity to tour the schools?
I have not.
I have toured all the schools.
Yeah, we've done that the last couple of years.
Yeah. The opportunity was definitely provided to us. I was unable to avail myself of it.
So Ken, we can get the capacity study to the committee before the next meeting.
Okay, I think that would be helpful.
I think it would be interesting to look at the capacity study that was done, look at the conclusions that were made then, and determine whether those still hold true at this point.
Good point, Jonathan.
I mean, just a bit of history. When I moved to Ridgefield, there were only 4 elementary schools. So
Branchville opened in 95.
I moved in 94.
That's funny.
Erin, when's my birthday?
November 29.
Ah, close, November 23rd.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So is there anything else from any other members of the board, the committee? Excuse me. All right. So I think that's a good start. If there are no further questions or comments, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Kathleen? And a second? Any seconds? Are you raising your hand, Jonathan? Your screen's blank.
Margaret's raising her hand.
Oh, Margaret, sorry. You're not on my thing. Margaret's beautiful. All right, all in favor? I see him, Margaret. All right, I think that's everybody. My screen froze, so we're going to say that was everybody. thank you all very much, and we will see you at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.